history can tell us a lot in the way the country might change, and actually, a lot of it goes against what the polling might say. For example, I've gone through each election and looked at the number of seats won by each party, and various maps, and the year, and news events, and I've given each party a little bubble, and depending on how many seats they won, that bubble grows and shrinks and grows and shrinks and grows and shrinks through time. Now, if I take you through year by year, you'll be able to see a very clear picture about the way in which the 2017 election will turn out. So this is 1945. As you can see, Labour hold these areas in the north, Wales, parts of Scotland, and we have the Liberal Nationals, which are this turquoise party, and we have the Lib Dems over here. In 1947, Britain's coal industry was nationalised. India gained independence from Britain. 1948, post-war immigration from the Commonwealth begins and the National Health Service is established. 1950, Labour wins the general election with Clement Attlee returning as Prime Minister. So you can see that they retain these areas in the north, the Midlands, Newcastle, Scotland, Wales, etc. 1951, Conservatives under Winston Churchill win the general election. So you can see the change from here to here. And it's mainly in actually much smaller geographical seats that Conservative power lies, where Labour holds huge swathes. And also Conservatives don't have a huge majority in this 1951 election. 1952, the Queen becomes the Queen. 1955, Winston Churchill retires as Prime Minister. Sir Anthony Eden, Conservative, becomes Prime Minister. So you can see that those Labour stronghold areas stay, Labour, the North, the Midlands, Newcastle and parts of Scotland. Clean Air Act comes into place and Britain switches on its first nuclear power station. 57. So Anthony Eden resigns and is replaced by Harold Macmillan. Now this is interesting because it shows that this is the only instance I have of a Prime Minister resigning mid-term and their popularity not decreasing. So 59, Harold Macmillan wins the general election, even though he was replaced undemocratically, some might say, mid-term. And you can see that they gain a few seats in these areas. Harold Macmillan resigns and the Conservative Sir Alec Douglas becomes PM. So France or any other country could be equally as hostile in 2017 as they were in 1963. Anyway, so this is the change in that 1963 election. I just got my dates mixed up. So you can see that the Lib Dems actually take a huge chunk out of Scotland, which gives the Conservatives less of a majority. And Labour grow in these areas in the north and various other areas. So in 1964 the death penalty is abolished, comprehensive education is initiated. '66, 65. Labour strengthens its parliamentary position in the general election. So let's see the changing map. You see that Labour ultimately grows in the very north of Scotland, that whole strip between London and the Midlands, and in Wales. Okay, let's keep going. Abortion and homosexuality are legalised. Conservatives win the general election with Edward Heath as Prime Minister. So you can see that in all these areas, which are really up for dispute by Labour. The swing areas, the Conservatives gain the power again. We've got our first SNP seat up here, look. North Sea oil concessions are auctioned in 1971. 1973, Britain joins the European Community. 74. So in 74 there's a hung parliament with Harold Wilson as PM. So you can see that these SNP seats here mean they count as others in this election, and no party has a clear majority. Labour wins by a tiny majority. So there's two elections in 1974, one in February, one in October. So in the second one, Labour wins by a tiny majority with Harold Wilson as Prime Minister. Again, you can see a lot of SNP seats here. So it seems to be when the UK is in kind of disillusionment, Scotland kind of goes its own way, and we've got a lot of kind of the picture in Scotland looks a lot different from the picture in England, and the picture in Wales, and the picture in Northern Ireland. So you can see that although it looks kind of mixed, relatively mixed there, some dramatic difference when things aren't going quite so well for the UK. So having two elections in 1 year wouldn't have been particularly seen as like everything going swell for the UK. So the countries that aren't England seem to go in a different direction politically than England. So Prime Minister Harold Wilson resigns and is replaced by James Callaghan. Britain is forced to borrow money from the International Money Fund. So this is the first instance I have on here of Labour's incompetence with the economy, and that's probably why later on strikes paralysed Britain during this so-called winter of discontent. Scotland and Wales reject devolution, and Conservative Margaret Thatcher becomes the first female Prime Minister. So Labour, they changed mid-term, that's unpopular. They became economically unsuccessful, and there was a lot of strikes. And so Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher won. 1981, racial tension sparks riots in Brixton and other areas. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher is re-elected by a landslide. You can see the difference from here to here. So even though Margaret Thatcher's done well, really well in England, she has lost a lot of Scotland and lost a lot of Wales. Once again, very similar picture to what we might have in the 2017 election. 12-month miners' strike crisis over pit closure begins. 1986, major national industries are privatised. 87, Conservative Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher wins a third term. Again, Scotland goes its own way, Wales goes even more its own way, and Northern Ireland goes even more its own way. Well, England remains kind of blip. 1990, Margaret Thatcher resigns as Prime Minister, John Major becomes Prime Minister. This proved very unpopular with the general public. So the Conservatives did win the election, even though the Prime Minister resigned mid-term, but you can probably tell that they're on the way to shrinking. And when Tony Blair comes into power, things become very popular for him. He's seen as a very popular candidate. By 1977, look at the huge majority he wins by. So it goes from that to that, bang. And you see, once again, they gain areas here, and all the way through to London, the north, parts of Scotland, parts of Wales again. The country isn't particularly united, because if you look at Scotland compared to the rest of the country, you see the Scottish are more SNP, Lib Dem, Wales than Conservatives. They really hate Margaret Thatcher and John Major and all that kind of conservative strikes and everything they did to workers' rights back in Margaret Thatcher's day and etc. So they really hate that. They're really disillusioned with the rest of England. England is mainly red and blue. Wales, again, it gains a lot of Labour areas in the south of Wales. Northern Ireland, there's the troubles starting in Northern Ireland, so Northern Ireland is kind of in its own kind of little corner of the world right now. So in 1988, the Good Friday Agreement is established in the Northern Irish Assembly. 1999, Britain decides not to join the European single currency. This is crucial, of course, because it meant that we weren't affected by as much by the 2008 banking crash when the EU economy ultimately fluctuated and countries like Greece and Ireland suffered. So that was in hindsight, that was a good decision. 2000, global stock markets tumble as dot-com bubble bursts. So when the internet originally started, there was a huge increase in the stock markets, and then eventually things kind of didn't work out and it burst. The bubble burst. 2001, the foot and mouth disease. Labour wins the general election with Tony Blair returning as Prime Minister. But 2001, 9/11 happened. 2003, Britain joins the US invasion of Iraq. Proved to be very unpopular with Prime Minister Tony Blair, and what many people blame as the thing that's left Labour in its position right now. 2004, 10 new states join the European Union. The country doesn't want to subsidise those poorer countries in the European Union. 2005, Labour wins a third consecutive term with Tony Blair as Prime Minister, and civil partnerships are given the same rights as same-sex couples. Great. So you can see that Labour lose a bit of a majority, particularly in Scotland. The Lib Dems gained a lot in there. They got a few SNP seats. They've lost a lot of the south of Wales as well, and it's mainly here. This bit here is where the Conservatives and Labour kind of fight it out. 2007, Tony Blair resigns as PM and Gordon Brown becomes the Prime Minister. This proved to be very unpopular, probably because of the Iraq War, the banking crisis, which is about to happen in 2008. He lost out in the next election, so having a Prime Minister change mid-term, unelected, and having a lot of problems proves very unpopular with the general public, and will almost certainly mean that the party in power changes in the next general election. So we got the banking crisis 2008. 2010, David Cameron becomes Prime Minister in coalition with the Liberal Democrats. But look at the way Scotland kind of stays the same. Labour the Conservatives gain a lot of areas in here. Gordon Brown resigns. We've got Ed Miliband now. And you can see how big the Lib Dems are. So the Conservatives don't have a full majority here because they're still remembered from the Margaret Thatcher days, or after the Margaret Thatcher days, when their popularity waned a lot. So they still have to go in coalition with the Lib Dems. Scotland votes no to independence in 2014. Proved to be very, very crucial. So they got the referendum in the first place because of the SNP. Prime Minister David Cameron wanted to ultimately shut the SNP once and for all. But as we know, it proved to be not the final possible referendum, and it proved to cause a lot of upset and division and things that may remain for the coming years. 2015, David Cameron becomes the Prime Minister, but look how much the Lib Dems lose out, and look how much the SNP suddenly come from nowhere to gain the whole of Scotland. So from here to bang here. I mean, if you look at the way in which it compares to the Brexit vote, it's almost very similar in the way in which Scotland is just cut off. But England, if you look at England, very different. England and Wales are very, very different from what you might expect. So you might expect in the Labour areas, which were fighting against Brexit, for there to be lots of Remain voters, but there weren't. So that was the big change that happened in recent years. The reason the SNP are so powerful, and it's causing their fight for independence. But also, it's strange how Wales become more conservative. Look, Cornwall becomes more conservative. So it's as if Wales and Cornwall join England at this point. They don't become more of their own country. It's only Scotland that becomes more of its own country. As if Wales and England unite after the Scottish independence referendum, but Scotland, well, they seem to go even further off in their own direction, even though they lose the referendum. May becomes the leader in 2016. She calls a snap election. Look how small Labour is right now. And we've seen the pattern in which Labour grows, Labour shrinks, Conservative grow, Labour grow, Conservative grow, Labour grow, Conservative grow. You see the pattern, right? So you can see that Labour has grown, it's shrunken, and it's probably due to grow again. So even though polling says that Jeremy Corbyn's going to lose, there's a good possibility if in this election or the next election that Labour could grow again in the same way that they already have. Now, it might be that we've got another step here. Conservatives will grow, Labour will shrink, and then we got in the next election the Conservatives will shrink again and Labour will gain that majority back. But here's the thing. It all depends on Prime Minister Theresa May's record, because she hasn't been elected in power. So if an event occurred where she somehow got a bad deal for Brexit, she would be seen as very unpopular. And so she would almost certainly lose her power as Prime Minister, and you'd see this Labour bubble growing again. As for the Lib Dem bubble, here, you can see it's very, very tiny right now. And look how popular it once was in 2014. So there's a good chance that in Scotland, the Lib Dems, being the Remain voters, could gain a lot of seats again. And you can also tell that it's going to be very, very difficult for the Conservatives to actually gain a majority in these areas, because you have never seen in all of these maps the Conservatives be in these areas. It's always been Labour. I'm personally hoping that this map of Scotland becomes more like a lot of the other maps in the way it's blue and red and gold and all sorts of different colours as opposed to one colour, because I think that one colour is the SNP, and it's making the deal for the independence referendum look very, very likely. Now, if it looks similar to that map in any way, even if it's just one patch of blue or a few patches of blue or gold or red or whatever, it's still going to look very similar. You've still got that line there. You've still got a very, very strong SNP majority in Scotland. That's going to lead to most definitely an independence referendum. The SNP may lose seats because they've got such a strong majority, but it still looks very, very much like Scotland is going to go its own way because of the trend that's going on from there to there. You can see. Scotland has slowly been colouring itself in. Wales. Well, Wales is kind of unpredictable. There used to be a lot of Labour areas in Wales, and it's slowly gone to Plaid Cymru. I feel like in this election, Plaid Cymru could, and the Lib Dems might gain a few seats in those areas, just like maybe here. England will almost certainly stay very similar. On Northern Ireland, well, I don't know enough about the parties in Northern Ireland, but I imagine it'll stay very similarly coloured to this. If you like this video, thank you for watching. Subscribe, comment. I like to know your opinions below, and I like to carry on the debate. So let me know your opinions. Thank you for watching. I'll see you later.